How does autopilot land us in the loop of defensiveness?
Well, the amygdala, right? It goes all the way back to when we were running from animals that perhaps were certainly faster than we are, and maybe a little smarter than we were back then. That amygdala is still with us. We are still sorting from that place. And so, of course, we're going to try to keep ourselves as safe as we possibly can. And when we're on autopilot, that's the place we go. 90% of our thinking is negative, 85% of our thinking is on repeat. So just do the short math on that. You have some pretty negative thinking happening a lot. And then when you add the vagaries of life and stress and a partner who may have differing ideas about things, and we get down that road of defensiveness fairly quickly on autopilot. And so that's why the first practice in my book, The Practice of Love, is stop, push, pause, and pay attention to your thoughts and feelings.
It requires mindfulness even to do that, to be able to push pause, right? And
Absolutely.
Most people are not operating with mindfulness. Most people are scrolling in the middle of a conversation. I think a lot of us also default into thinking that doing the work means doing the therapy and auditing the roots of our defensiveness, meaning like we go back and we think, maybe I didn't feel loved by my mom or by my dad, or I felt shut down, or I felt whatever. And so it's my partner's job to understand when I told them that this is where it's coming from. And so when I get defensive, you're supposed to hold me like a baby and pet me like a little rabbit, whatever it is, right? And if you don't do that, then you are my enemy. You are just the enemy that I am sleeping with, right? Have you ever had a relationship that landed in a loop of defensiveness and never quite found its way out? What part did you play in the spiral? Lair Torrent is a psychotherapist, executive consultant, and relationship expert who wants you to grow up and own it. And that makes sense because a therapist married to a psycho-spiritual counselor for over 23 years probably wouldn't get away with anything less in his own relationship, nor would he hope to. In the midst of a successful acting career, Lair says he had a moment of clarity on the set of Law and Order between takes. He just knew he was meant to do something else. Today, Lair applies his philosophy of personal accountability across romantic relationships as well as the workplace, consulting to companies and working closely with couples and organizations. Lair Torrent's first book, entitled The Practice of Love, focuses on the 5 principles for relating. Today, we're talking about reactiveness, autopilot, and the ways we destroy safety in our relationships. We look at the damage that is done when we argue for our good intentions rather than for common ground. And Lair explains why he hates I statements, why he believes there's no such thing as a communication problem, and why he has no issue with people walking out of his office if they're not willing to own their behavior. Because to hear him tell it, without accountability, there can be no relationship. So think about that the next time you're caught in the loop of defensiveness with your sweetie. What does it say about them, and what does it say about you? What I want to talk about today is the loop of defensiveness in relationships.
Okay.
But I want to start with a little bit more of your background for anyone who doesn't know you, because I've gone down the rabbit hole, and also the benefit of seeing the video clips of you and your wife doing your podcast together, and the kind of loving way that you look at each other when you're revealing all of your secrets. And it's good stuff. It's healing America. It bears mentioning that you are a therapist married to a therapist.
That's true.
How did you transition from acting to therapy?
It was an interesting story because I was sitting on the set of Law and Order, and I had just come from Hair and Makeup, where I had been talking with Mariska Hargitay, and I went back to my trailer that had my name upon it, and I was feeling all about myself, and I had a movie that was opening up. I had a play that was getting ready to do, and I had just done a pilot with Kira Sedgwick and Beverly D'Angelo, and so I was essentially in that place, like the sweet spot. And it was like a God mic in my head as I sat in my trailer waiting to go on. It said, this is all a bunch of crap. You're doing this because your dad didn't love you very much. And you want to see your big face up on that screen so someone will think you're special. Finally. And you can keep doing this, or you can get real and do what you know you have to do. And I had already been diving deep down the rabbit hole of self-help. And so I had read a book called Wishcraft by Barbara Sher. It's an old one, but a good one. And in the book, she said, if you want to know what to do with your life and you're unsure which way your life should go, look no further than your bookshelf. And so there was like 6 or 7 books on acting and about 70 books on therapy, the brain, self-help. And I was like, oh, so there it is. And it was at that point that I started looking for a program.
Well, that's an obnoxious voice. I don't know that I've ever heard a God voice. Like, I will say I've never heard a God. I've never
Well,
had
that's
a
what they
God
call it.
voice.
That's what they call it in the. I should probably preface that by saying that's what they call it in the theater. Like when you're
Okay.
standing on the stage and it's
Right, it
like
just comes
everything's
from
dark,
above.
and they're
Uh-huh.
like, and you do your audition, and they go, "That was terrible. Can you take it back to 1?" And so it's the God mic in the theater. Yeah.
All right. Well, my God voice is a little bit kinder to me, but I think we already scratched the surface of why your God voice was
Mm-hmm.
unkind. Like I said, you're a therapist married to a therapist. You talk a lot on your podcast about the relationship, about
Mm-hmm.
practice of relating, the practice of building a relationship,
That's
taking
right.
30 minutes a day to talk to each other,
At
no
least.
devices, no nothing, which, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, I'm sure like at least 50% of marriages could be saved if people would spend 30 minutes a day, no devices, talking to each other. I think if you're being proactive and you're starting from a place of being safe with each other, then you can set up practices. You can set up a practice of the 6-second kiss, like the Gottmans say. But once people fall into a loop of defensiveness, it gets very
Mm-hmm.
hard to
Yes, it does.
love your enemy, as
Mm-hmm.
it were. It's been
Mm-hmm.
said that our minds are designed to wander. I've done
Mm-hmm.
Vipassana, I've done all those types of things. I know you're sort of a champion of those things. So we begin by saying that we both agree that the human mind is not inherently calm.
No,
That said, we don't want to be reactive,
no.
but we are scared. We are scared little creatures. Um, how much is gained by auditing the roots of the defensiveness versus trying to just train ourselves into
Sure.
better non-reactive habits?
So a lot and not a lot, right? It depends. So I
Yeah.
tell people all the time, and I say this at the beginning of when I talk to companies about their relationship to their work, as an example. I say what I'm about to say is going to be amazing. It's going to be extraordinary. The pearls of wisdom that are going to be coming forth from my mouth are going to be awe-inspiring, shocking, and probably bring you to tears. But it will pale in comparison to what you do or what you do not do outside of therapy. Insight is not necessarily curative, right? It's doing the thing when you least want to do it,
Insight is
right?
not necessarily curative.
That's right.
I want to write that down. I want to put that on a
No, it's
pillow.
a good one. I'm going to get you a pillow.
It's
We'll
a good one. I
embroider
need a
it
pillow.
for you. Yeah. No, insight is not curative. It's interesting, and aha moments are wonderful. And it's what my therapist said to me a long, long time ago. I would come in every week with a new quote from a new author from some new book, and she said to me, Lair, she goes, "Let me ask this. Great. Every week you come in here with one of these, but when is it going to jump off the page and into your life?" And that was a moment of shift for me, because the work was wonderful and the therapy was great and the reflection was awesome and the container of therapy is really something, especially if we've had shoddy parenting, and most of us have. And so being able to come to a safe place where you're going to get an opportunity to have that reflection, to have that insight from someone who's probably hopefully read a few more books than you have, and then to go out into your life and to try those things out and to come back and go, that didn't work, this didn't work, let's figure out why. That's when we start getting traction.
Let's say you understand that your defensiveness, for example, is a problem in your relationship and you want to change that. What would you counsel that person for their habits, right? To try to avoid the defensiveness that escalates the argument.
Have you ever heard of the idea of inviting Mara to tea? So Mara is that Eastern idea of all that ails us, all that bothers us. In this particular case, perhaps our defensiveness.
Okay.
Right? We want to bring our defensiveness in. We want to see the ways in which we tend to defend. And what are we defending? The wounded children within us, of course. Right? So much of what we do, especially with a relationship, is you, Poonam, you. It's you. You're the problem,
No, of
not
course you're the
me.
problem.
No, and I will be fine to work on my shit once you do yours. In my book, it's the other way around. I'm like, no. None of the practices that I offer point the finger at the other person. We lose all of our power, all of our traction the moment we start pointing the finger. Does that mean there's not fault on the other side? Absolutely, there's fault on the other side. However, you have zero control over that. So, to your point and to your question, we have to get very, very mindful and aware about the parts of us, the defended parts of us that are showing up. And so when people talk to us about nonviolent communication techniques and I statements and all those wonderful things, they don't work. And we've been in the
Talk more
psychological
about
community.
that.
Yeah,
I
in the
don't understand why
psychological,
you think they don't work.
they don't work. And here's why, because they ask us, the first thing in nonviolent communication is that we bring empathy first. Well, what happens if I show up in a part of myself that is devoid of empathy, right? My protector parts don't do that. So I'm showing up in my Instagram trying to send an email.
Mm.
That app does not, defensive part of me, Lair, my wife calls him Mitch, does not do. These are the parts of us that are designed to create distance, not closeness. And so
Yeah.
we're showing up in a conversation saying what I think I heard you say, right? Turns into, what the frig did you just say to me,
Yeah.
very, very
Right.
quickly, when the wrong part shows up. And so early in
Right.
my career, I was doing all that nonsense, right? And it was working like a charm in the sessions with people, and they were glad handing me, high-fiving me. Some people were coming up and hugging me at the end. And before they got to the elevator banks of my building, it was going off the rails, because couples do not play by the rules. Nonviolent communication requires us to play by the rules. It requires us to be mindful and aware. And we're not doing that when we are, quote unquote, triggered, overly used word, but it's apt, right?
So
So we're triggered
nonviolent communication works until you exit the
apart.
therapist's door.
Well, or if you're in the wise self,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in the compassionate, empathetic part of you, and this is why sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. So Friday night, we had this terrible fight, knockdown, drag out, slept in separate rooms, got up the next day. Hey, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
and they're like, what was different? Mood? No. Part of you that showed up, the aspect of self. We are not the single organisms we see staring us back at us in the mirror. We are the many vestiges of ourselves, depending on the people, the places, and the things that we come in contact with.
You suggested at one point that we should stop arguing for our good intentions. I love that statement because it puts the onus on the person. And it's not saying go get therapy for yourself to understand why you want to convince someone of your good intentions. It's saying stop trying to convince somebody. Now, that makes it clear that in a romantic relationship, you've become adversaries.
Not what I said. That's not how I said it.
Right. That's not how I said it. That's not what I meant. You never understand me. You're the worst, right?
It was a joke.
And exactly, it was a joke, which is a great one. But follow up, how do we handle a partner who won't stop arguing for their good intentions?
So this is where things get sticky, because I'll say this: there is no relationship where there is no personal responsibility, and that's the fifth and final practice in my way of working with couples. Right, everything teeters on it. Even the way I set up the 5 practices, that one's in the common denominator position. All the other 4 practices reside on: are you going to own it? Are you going to own your stuff? Not that you meant to hurt their feelings, right? Because I'm never going to admit to something like that. You're asking me to be permissive. You're asking me to own something that I didn't mean to hurt her feelings. That was not what I meant. I said, of course not.
Right.
You didn't mean to hurt her feelings, but you did.
Yeah.
Empathy requires no agreement. Right? It requires no agreement. I'm asking you to take the precipice of emotional intelligence, of recognizing that, like, while I did not mean to hurt your feelings, and we can talk about that in a minute, the first thing I need to do is triage the moment between us, where I would say, Punam, first of all, I never meant to hurt your feelings. We can talk about that in a minute, but I know that I did. And for that, I am very, very sorry. Not, I'm sorry that you feel that way.
Beautiful stuff.
Right? Oh, it's such crap. No, it's I.
Empathy requires no agreement is a phrase I haven't heard before. So many things that should be stitched on pillows. So many things that should be on coffee mugs.
I've learned in this day and age of Instagram to speak in bumper sticker.
Well, this is a good bumper sticker. Can people absorb that? Can people absorb the idea that empathy requires no agreement?
In your adult selves, you can. And your
how many people are adults?
Not many.
Oh.
We are playing in our poo. We're waddling around in our diapers and acting like children when we need to point the finger back at ourselves and go, what part of me is showing up? What's the story I'm telling about my partner? What would love do right now? What would personal responsibility look like? Do you notice none of the things that I said point at the other person? It requires me to grow up. What does that mean? It means it got lost turns into I lost it. Your feelings got hurt. I'm sorry about that. Turned into like, I hurt your feelings. And I
hurt your feelings, right.
I hurt your feelings and I love you so dearly. I'm just sorry that it came out that way. I'm sorry that I said the thing that I said. I'm sorry, that part of me came up and I was really defensive. Watch, you own that stuff to people and they look at you like a dog that's heard a funny noise. They don't know what to do with it. I call it the Jedi mind trick for those of you who know what Star Wars is, right? Like you say to me, like, tell me, just pretend and tell me that I hurt your feelings.
How dare you hurt my feelings?
I did, didn't I? I'm going to be honest with you. I heard it when it came out of my mouth. And I thought then it might have been a little on the line. I'm really sorry.
And suddenly you sound like the adult in the room and I can trust you.
Well, and I can trust you. We don't even have to agree. And this is the thing that everybody's missing. It's the reason why I have a job, right?
The analogy that keeps coming to me when someone won't apologize for hurting someone is if you were driving down the street and somebody was crossing and you didn't see them and then you hit them and you ran out of your car and you saw that their leg was broken, would you immediately start saying it wasn't your fault? Or would you say, oh, I'm so sorry, can I help you? Would you be scared of the lawsuit or would you apologize? Because the leg broke. Broke, right? And people have trouble with that. And so when you're dealing with defensive people, apologies are almost impossible. And that's why people recommend going back to the I statement. Help me understand why you think I statements are a bad idea. Just because they don't last outside the therapist's room?
I don't think they're a bad idea. I don't think they're a bad idea. I think they're a great idea. I think they don't work because people are showing up defended. As long as you're showing up in your defended part of self, in your inner critic or in your wounded child, you're never going to get to, I'm sorry. Those parts don't house that ability. It's like going to your Instagram and trying to send an email. You can't do it. It's just not there. And so I statements, they'll do them for a minute as long as there's a therapist in the room watching, typically. But
there's
the moment they're in the there's a referee. Yeah. The moment it's like, and they'll put Lair. They'll go, Lair, come on. And I go, I know. We'll get to that. But we want to pave the ground. We want to triage the moment. We want to make sure that they feel cared for. We're not trying to win something here. Right. And so I statements are great. They are. They point back to you. I get the frame. I'm just saying it doesn't work when you are in the part of you that is designed to win stuff. So that's the first thing
part of you that's designed to win. And the minute you see your partner as the enemy, you're in that.
Well, and because from that frame, everyone and everything is a reason to protect yourself. And so we draw a Venn diagram, 2 circles intersecting. This is what I do with couples. And I say, okay, who's here? Who's showing up to this conversation? Because we know, typically we'll put a big conversation on the map, right, on the schedule. And so they'll come in and we know we're going to be talking about the kids, the sex, the money, the you name it, and how they haven't been able to communicate. We have a communication problem. I'm like, no, you don't. You have a parts of self problem. You can articulate yourself just fine. It's the part of you that keeps showing up that's the problem. And you're going like this because that's what that part does. And so I will say, all right, let's take a breath. Let's mindfully name for you and for you who's here. Well, if I'm honest, I feel really vulnerable. Right. So what happens when we feel vulnerable? I want to protect myself. Right? I feel like this is going to go badly and I'm going to be, yelled at again. Kids are here. Guess who shows up? Protector part. And so we have to mindfully ask and say to those parts of us, I know you're scared. I know you want to get mad again, but that's not worked. Can I just feel into my wisest, loving, compassionate self and step forward into that little almond in this version of myself? And so I teach people how to stay in that aspect when they're in the conversation. And then guess what happens? I statements. They're flying all over the place. And it's coming from an organic place. So I statements are plentiful from your wise self. Because you say I hurt you, and I go, I recognize that. I saw your face, and I'm so sorry. I should have never spoken to you. I should have never spoken to you that way. I was totally out of line. I was absolutely in my baser, most protective parts of self, and that came from those places. And I don't want to handle you that way. Otherwise, it's like, I think I heard you say, sounds like Stephen Hawking. It's no good. It doesn't work.
Ultimately, what you're trying to do when you don't use the I statement is you're trying to get to a shared narrative. But the inability to build a shared narrative is a big part, I think, of the loop of defensiveness, because you never really reach full safety again. Things are not really completely resolved. So you can stay defensive for really the totality of the relationship. So that's to say, like, you counsel to stop litigating the intention and, work
Mhm.
on building the repair. The problem is that when you have two defensive people, if one stops, but the other doesn't match the stoppage of the
Yep.
litigation,
Yeah.
then over time the shared narrative cannot exist. People still don't want to leave their relationships. They,
I have an answer
by
for
a
you.
thousand cuts,
Yeah.
realize that they have
Yeah.
accepted next to nothing just to
Mhm.
not explode their current life. Do
Yeah.
you think giving up on the shared narrative is equal to giving up on being heard? And if you feel you will not be heard,
Mhm.
then are you tacitly accepting just being tolerated rather than ever really being loved again?
Sure. And let me answer that in two ways. Shared narrative. I don't
Mm,
believe we have to have a shared narrative.
really?
No, you just have to understand that what you did, said, didn't do, didn't say hurt my feelings. You have to have empathy. We may never agree on how we got here or that my intentions were to be shitty. No, we don't have to agree. Like, I'm never going to agree with that, but I am going to agree that that I hurt your feelings. Right? That's not necessarily like you can believe whatever you want about how we got here, what was done, what didn't get done. But when we get down to the base experience of I hurt your feelings and that matters to me, the story kind of
But
becomes
that is a
unimportant.
shared narrative. Right.
But the narrative is, if you can't get there though, there's no relationship to be had. I mean, you can stay, and I say this to couples all the time. So you can stay. I had this couple. I talk about them in the book. They came in and they were working the 5 practices, and things were going well. And I was taking a bit of a breath around them because they've been doing so well. And they came in, they sat down, and the tension between them was palpable. And she's like, "Do you want to tell him?" He's like, "I'll tell him." He goes, he starts sort of naming off my 5 practices, right? He's like, I'm tired of the mindfulness. I'm not going to think about my parts or the story that I'm telling and choosing her. He's like, I am who I am.
Sexy.
And that's just, yeah. And that's just,
Sorry. I
that's
had
what it's
to.
going to be. No, that's exactly right. And she
No.
looks at me and she's like, well, smart guy, what am I going to do with that? I said, well, basically you've got a couple choices. One, you can accept this and just recognize that he's told you who he is and who he's going to be, quite literally.
Mm.
And so you can move forward. You have to adjust your expectations and know that this is what you're going to get. Or you can pack your shit. Third option is you can pack his shit. I say this, and people hate it when I boil something as complicated as relationships down to something so simple where there is no responsibility, there is no relationship. And so sometimes, I mean, I've gotten this point with Ashley before, and I laugh about it because, I practice these things, and sometimes she has to remind me to practice these things. But I remember not too long ago, we were in it, and I was owning my stuff. I was really owning it. And I looked at her, I said, your problem is you have some shit to own, and you don't want to own it. And we were in the bedroom. I was sitting on the bed, and she just leans back against the wall, and she slides down the wall, and she puts her hands in her head, and she's like, I know you're right. And I go, I know, right? It's so great to be here. I'm in the adult position. She's like, shut up, right? We're laughing about it, but she's like, you're right, and we couldn't move forward. We couldn't. Thankfully, our relationship is such that it was robust enough that it wasn't going to break us. But I had to say to her, I was like, you have some shit to own. You do. You just do. And there will be places like that in your relationship. And if we're both operating from that adult self and we're using these practices in this way, you can kind of go, you're right. You're right. And it's so freeing to go, that's probably right. You might be the smartest person in the room right now, because I'm in my child self.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I just love the image of you being like, look at me. I'm owning the hell out of it. I'm owning the hell out of my stuff. Like, this is what
That's winning.
this is supposed to be the template of the next level of evolution. Because, like,
Yeah.
when you first start dating someone, when you first start falling in love with someone, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
where are you getting your kudos? But now,
Yeah.
23 years later, it's, I'm owning the hell out of my stuff. Look at me. I'm so good at the business of you because I'm owning
so
my
adult.
stuff.
People will say to me, well, this is where you're asking me to be too permissive. I said, no, this is where I'm asking you to grow up.
All right.
This is where I'm asking you to embody your most adult selves and just acknowledge the fact that you perhaps have hurt this person's feelings. You did not mean to, but you did. You stepped out of line. And there is a veil. And in our culture, personal responsibility is very, very close to blame. Blame shared a room with shame in college, I think. Right. And so we don't want to go there. but it's so freeing to step on the other side of that and look your partner in the face and say, I recognize I did that. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm so sorry. Right? Like there's this freedom on the other side of personal responsibility. When you learn to own stuff, it's not that you're knuckling under. It's a place of strength. It's not weakness. It's not being permissive. It's not rolling over. And it's not surrender. That's not what we're talking about.
We're going back to people's childhoods because
Mm-hmm.
you don't marry your boyfriend. You marry their childhood experience of what is acceptable, and then you fight with it for the rest of your life. I used to say,
Well,
"Oh,
yeah.
I married insert name here," and then I got
Mm-hmm.
home from the honeymoon, closed the door, turn around, and Tex was sitting there,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
like, "Who that?" You know.
Yeah.
But the defensiveness, the reason why I go back to it is because I just think it's the biggest stumbling block to couples who otherwise have the intellectual capacity to repair, right?
Well, the one thing I wanted to dovetailing a little bit on what you were talking about is, the idea that we marry one person and we come home and there's this other person there.
Yeah.
And that we end up, use the word, we end up fighting about this. And I think that the idea of relationship, particularly marriage or long relationships, needs to change. The idea that we've been sold this bill of goods of happily ever after, rom-com moments, right? And sexy walks on the beach. Those, for me, they are symptoms, right? Rom-com moments, fun, good sex. That's all symptomatic of something else. And the thing that Ashley and I have done over the course of 23 years is we have been successful at owning our stuff together, like working it out. Like you're mirroring for me something that I need to own and see. Like I think everyone in our lives is a mirror, a guru, a teacher. If we decide to look at people like that. Yeah.
If you decide
Especially your kids
use
and
them.
your partner. So Ashley's telling me something that I don't love hearing. I love her. I respect her. And, I think I'm married right. Perhaps I should be listening. Perhaps I should be taking that in and going, rather than just pushing back and going, you know what, screw you. I might not love it, but there's a reflection there. And there may be a nugget there for me to learn from, to understand something new about myself. If we started looking at it like that, rom-com moments and sexy walks on the beach are no problem. That's not it. We don't have a hard time getting there. Right. But we have to be willing to meet each other in the space.
Something I think about lately is what will I counsel my children in terms of looking for a partner? I heard once where someone said, marry the person who you know will see you through the death of your parents. I kind of feel like it's something broader. It's something like marry someone you care enough about to help them process everything that happened until they met you, with the understanding that you might have to be the target of it a lot of the time. Do you love this person enough? Right? And do you think they love you enough to do that for you? Right. And that is a much higher bar, because basically then it becomes the bar for my friends. My friends are like lifetime friends, right. Really high bar, right? But
if like I set that bar really high, and found that person, and I feel like she did too. And we require of each other to grow, to change it. And look, we can't paint with broad strokes. People need different things in relationships.
Yeah, and you don't know what you need when you're younger.
You don't, and hopefully that changes and you change together. But it's what you said. It's like, I say this: love is inconvenient, and so people will be like, "Well, do we have to?" I'm like, "You do if you love them." I married somebody who has complex childhood trauma, right? All of her stuff, and so do I. All of her stuff, all of my stuff are going to come out and play. Are you willing to hang in there with them? Love is inconvenient. I'm sorry. That's the definition of love. It's inconvenient. But that's what it is to love someone, to show up in that space and say, I'm here for you. And at some point, as I said to Ashley at one point, I said, just real quick, when do I stop paying the bill for the men who came before me?
She goes,
She's like, that's fair. She goes, it's fair because you've been writing a lot of checks, and I had been.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like an unkind question. We were kind of joking when I said it, but yeah, we've done this work. We've gotten to this place. Can you now begin to recognize the man you actually married? That was a nice moment.
And it sounds like two pieces, right? Because it would be the counsel to our children would be find someone you love enough and who loves you enough to help them mutually work through everything that happened until the moment when you met. But also make sure it's someone who's open enough to doing it. Because if you're willing to offer it all and you've got it on a platter and you're like, here, let's go, and then that person cannot sit with it,
And many can't.
then, right? And there's the divorce rate in many
Well,
cases.
and I said this in a recent Instagram video. It's like, I'm the last door anyone wants to knock on. I'm the last phone call. They will have exhausted every other avenue prior to coming to me. And it's all in an effort to not feel how you feel. Sad is bad, right? We have pathologized our feelings in this culture. We should always be feeling good. And so sadness and all that is, no, we are process-oriented beings, right? You drink water, guess what happens?
Mm-hmm.
You eat food, guess what happens? Process. Breathe in air, process. Emotions, process. Your nervous system is meant to be able to process your feelings.
Right.
And so people come to me and they're thinking, here, this guy's good. He'll show me how to not feel how I feel. And I'm like, I'm a feelings dealer. I'm going to show you how to get into your feelings and actually feel the shit that you don't want to feel. That's going to make you a better person. And so the same happens in relationships, right? I was like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to go through that. Is there someone
What percentage
there
of the time is your first consult your last because you give them exactly that spiel and they say nope and walk right out?
Like, I'm not everybody's flavor, and that's fine.
Right.
Because I'm done with dog and pony show therapy. I don't need people to stick around because for any other reason other than if you want to do the work. If you don't want to do the work, and I say this in my book too, the only thing I can't cure is I don't want to. I can't help you. What you've come for is the doctor's note out. And that's something we should talk about.
Well, and I think obviously being in a relationship where you both want to do the work, I can see how you wouldn't want to work with people that don't do it because you know what's on the other side. And you're like, dude, what are you doing with your life? You're wasting my time, right? Because I could be spending this on
and
someone else.
And you're wasting your time and your money. And you probably need to go grow up somewhere.
Yeah. I'm sure they love that.
It's not my job to make it shiny and happy, right? I actually did have someone leave my practice very recently. It was a couple, and I looked at the guy and I was like, I think you need to grow up. I wasn't on her side necessarily. I said, you made a person. You two got together and you made a human being. Look at you. Congratulations. Anytime you add or subtract a member of a family, you redouble the stress. You've added each other, and now you've added a kid. I'm sorry, but Margarita Tuesdays are probably over for a little while. You need to grow up. And he was like, I don't think I want to do therapy no more.
Great.
Okay.
Sounds like a good one. What's the most powerful change in your relationship over the years? Or the most powerful challenge that you guys have faced, which I think I know what it is, but 23 years is a long time.
It is. What do you think it is?
It sounds to me like unhealed childhood trauma.
We've created a holding space for that. We were already therapy students, and as we headed into our relationship, we went through a program together, and so we knew the landscape of that nonsense. It was when we had kids. That's when that sent us running to our couples therapist, because it dramatically changed our relationship, right? And this is something I think we're not talking about enough, is that there is a gendered piece to becoming parents typically, right? I think women start the idea of becoming a parent about the moment they become pregnant. Mm-hmm. And men come around about, year 3 or 4 where, oh yeah, that's right, we should probably kick in here. And it dramatically changed the dynamic of my relationship with Ash, right? And I've had other people say this too. There is this primordial pull, I think, for a woman they fall in love typically, not always, but typically they fall in love with, in the primary relationship becomes the child. And so the relationship between the man and the woman changes. And that's what happened to me. And I was sort of like, hey, I'm backup parent. What happened to this us and we thing? It just felt like I was sort of kicked out. And it really hurt. And it brought up all my childhood stuff.
Were there any preemptive conversations when she was pregnant about like, hey, how are we going to
navigate
this, but without knowing what it is?
We didn't really know that was coming. And I try to talk to couples about it now. This life cycle event of adding a child is really difficult for people. Because
and you don't know how the person's going to respond. You're watching them respond in real time. Mm-hmm, they're not thinking about how their response is affecting you. There are hormones involved.
Well, everybody's in fight or flight. And so, to your question, what was the most difficult time? That one was tough for us. That one definitely put us on our heels.
What percentage of the time are you two defensive with each other now?
Not a lot.
What is that like?
It's great. It's fucking great, man. Like, it's just great. It's just like, I look forward to seeing her. She looks, it's still like, you want to talk about that limerence and puppy love. Do you lose some of that? Sure. But you build it back with oxytocin, right? That you're constantly doing for each other and showing up for each other. And it's like, can't wait to see her, and it's amazing. It's amazing. Like the other day, it was actually a few months ago, she and I kind of groused at each other. We kind of barked at each other, and we don't do that very often. And the boys were in the living room, and I kind of peered in to Jake and Jasper, and I was like, "You guys okay?" And they're like, "Yeah, why?" And I said, "Well, Mom and I kind of fought." And they're like, "You always end up laughing at the end," because we do, right? She's like, "You cannot talk to me that way," and I'm like, "I heard it when it came out of my mouth, and I knew it was crap." Right. And we've gotten to that point.
I agree vehemently.
Yeah. You are way smarter than me in this moment. Right. But like, it's taken a lot.
I win because I acknowledged it.
But, to your questions, like, I still have that part of me that gets up in my ear when she says something that I don't like, which happens. Yeah. And I hear him and he whispers in my ear and he goes, "Now you get to say some really screwed up shit." And I'm like, I'm not saying it. I know where that goes. Right. It's still there. Like, I still want to go, "What are you talking about?" And I go, no. I stop. I practice one, push pause.
There's a lot of people who are divorced in midlife and very happy with their lives. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's never been a generation like ours before where
that's right.
Raising their kids, still feeling healthy, still feeling vibrant, still feeling like they've got a lot of living ahead of them and there's nothing. That wasn't the case one generation or two generations ago. For those of us who are out there now thinking about a second act, right? And thinking about how scary it would be to get into another relationship, aside from mindfulness, what would you recommend we do to set ourselves up to avoid falling into the loop of defensiveness in our next relationship?
If you want to change any habit, you have to first self-awareness. And this is why I don't understand why Western clinical models are not teaching mindfulness first. They are now more than ever. Because if you are not self-aware, how are you going to change a habit? That's mindfulness. Anyway, aside from mindfulness, parts, narrative, right? Like, what part of you shows up to a relationship? Who do you want to be? You get to decide how you show up. And it's like, and so you're not showing up in this young part of you that's like, I hope they like me. It's either going to be the guy or gal you don't want or nothing. Mm-hmm. You show up in the vibrancy of of the work that you've done and the energy of self-love and self-compassion and boundaries of who you are, of your intrinsic goodness, knowing who you are and what you bring to the table. And you require that they do the same. Culls the herd, first of all. You'll have fewer choices.
They do the same.
Yeah, like if you haven't done your work, then don't show up. I don't want any nonsense. Yeah.
Just wear a shirt that says no nonsense.
And that's where you have to be, because if your little kid shows up that was not loved, didn't feel safe, didn't feel enough, didn't feel like they mattered. But when you show up in that version of yourself that goes, no, sweetie, no, you can't come here for this. Hello. Right. Now we have an opportunity to create a relationship through our wise selves. That doesn't mean that it doesn't get messy from time to time. It does. But you can love and be loved from this place. And then it's not codependent and it's not as messy.
By the way, I do have to say that I love the fact that you say no nonsense, because my mom's favorite phrase her entire life has been nonsense is nonsense. And by the way, you have to picture like a 4'10" little Indian lady with my dad who's 5'11", and I never saw her explain herself, right? Yeah. My mom would just simply say, nonsense is nonsense. Just walk out of the room. Like approximately 8 feet taller. Yeah. I mean, you can't argue with that. And listen, she's had one of the happiest marriages I've ever seen.
Yeah, because she knows when nonsense is nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to maybe get that on a t-shirt and send one for you and one for your wife. What do you think?
I love that.